Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. We're having an awesome panel discussion where we're going to be discussing resource optimization and prioritization. Got that right now. I see we're already getting some people joining us. We're going to give everyone else a few minutes to log on. And in the meantime, we'll just quickly dive into our topic and a quick intro to our speakers today. So 2023, it's been an interesting year so far, a lot of challenges. We've been seeing layoffs, businesses scaling back on investment, and reduced customer demand. So for a lot of teams, they're being asked to do more with less. That's especially true with product. So optimizing resources is critical in that scenario, and it's a lot easier to do that when you know which projects to prioritize. There's a lot of ways of doing that, and our awesome product experts are going to be telling you how they do it in the next 45 minutes. So, speaking of product experts, today we're joined by Sarah Hum, our very own co-founder at Canny. We also have Chris Butler, who is the lead product manager at Google, Belinda Wong, who is VP of platform product at Salesforce, and Simone Paul Tamussin, VP of global product development at Mastercard. So, welcome to everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. So we have a few key topics that we want to discuss. So as we go, you're welcome to use the chat as well as the Q&A box. So you can submit your questions as we go. At the very end of the webinar, we're going to try and get to as many of those audience questions as we can. We're also recording this webinar, so we'll send around the recording link. Feel free to share that with friends, other people who couldn't make it today. And with that, we're going to kick off the conversation. So we'll start with some quick self-introductions. Sarah, would you be able to kick us off with a quick intro about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And yeah, thank you for everyone for being here, especially our panelists. We definitely appreciate your insight and we're very excited to chat. So my name is Sarah. I am one of the co-founders here at Canny and I run our product team. We launched Canny just over 6 years ago now. So in 2017, Canny is a customer-driven product management tool. So what that means is we help teams collect, manage, analyze, and prioritize feedback. And so, yeah, I'm super excited about this chat today because, prioritization is a key thing here at Canny, but also something that we offer, to our customers, and we want to help them with that. So love talking about it. Very excited.
We're excited too. Chris, could you give us a quick intro, please?
Sure. Hi, I'm Chris Butler, and I am a lead PM in the Google Core Machine Learning Group. And so I do a couple things. I focus a lot on strategy for our organization and then think about kind of PMing the PM experience. And so this idea of prioritization, kind of portfolio management, all the way down to like helping each individual team really do their ideal road mapping process. So all of these topics are really interesting to me and great to be here. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for being here. Belinda, could you give us a quick intro, please?
Yeah, awesome. I'm Belinda Wong, and I have been working with the Salesforce company for just over 16 years, primarily focused on the platform. And with the platform, product management platform is unique in that you are dealing with both external and internal users and customer bases. And most recently, my teams in the entitlement or authorization services space have been called out as having the engagement model with our Trailblazer communities. So I'm awesome to share some of my experiences here. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for being here. We're excited to hear those experiences. And we'll finish off with a quick intro from Simone, if you could, please.
Yeah, sure. So Simone Paul Tamussin, so Simone from Italy, Italian. I've been in the payment industry since 2002, always in product management. I've moved around so many places. I love payments, as you can imagine. In Mastercard since 2016. Now I lead in the Mastercard Gateway business unit, the product management team that is spread globally because we have to provide services globally to our customers. So, and we try to be as close as possible to them. So, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all for being here today. We're really excited to have this discussion with you all and learn from you. So with that, we'll dive into the heart of the conversation here. At Canny, we're really focused on building the highest impact projects. We prioritize based on several factors. Obviously, user feedback is a big one for us. But we really want to hear from the panel. How do you all prioritize projects and what to build? And part two of that question, are there any prioritization frameworks, models, or tactics that you recommend? So with that, we'll ask Chris to start us off.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the key thing for me when it comes to prioritization is that we should just never lose sight of the fact that prioritization is really just this kind of connective tissue between, say, if I've been using the terminology product spine a lot recently. And so this idea of like the strategy, the roadmap, and the task list as really being something that is kind of anchored in the decision making we do today. And so prioritization ends up being really a way that we use our strategy to then decide what goes into our roadmap. And maybe that like area between roadmap and then tasks themselves could be called prioritization, but also that space between kind of strategy and roadmap could be called prioritization. And so I think it's really key that we do not forget that it's really about how are we enabling our strategy in some way, how are we actually solving problems for our customer, and whatever the intersection is between like a business need and our customer really is the way that we should end up doing that. When it comes to frameworks, I guess I tend to use an awful lot of them. I think the best way to do this is actually most recently with a kind of a larger team within our group. We ended up looking at a bunch of different ways to do portfolio management across their entire list of products. And so we're talking about like tens of products potentially in how we should actually do not only resourcing, so who's going to spend their time on what at what ratio, but also what projects inside of that are very valuable. And so in that particular case, I actually would walk them through kind of things like the Eisenhower matrix. We would look at things like the spectrum across the Kent-Beck's 3X model, which is really on the like an S curve, where all these different things, even the idea of like McKinsey's 3 time horizons. And so looking at those, I think you start to get an idea of like the comfort level from each of the different like kind of ways of doing this. And we ended up finding a way to get into not only like bucketing of things into different like quintiles, and then the idea of like stack ranking. And then from there, I think you can have like a better conversation about like, are we actually putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to like resources and prioritization, and how in alignment with the strategy is that. So those are kind of things that I do, but I think like giving people options in the way that you end up doing prioritization is really valuable, and at least understanding more kind of the nuance of the prioritization that you end up doing. So that's what I would say.
It's a great point. Yeah, the nuance is really important. Sarah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think to Chris's point about, balancing business needs and customer needs, I feel like, like people say prioritization is an art, not a science. And I would definitely like agree there. There's a bunch of things at play, a lot of things that need to be balanced in or considered. And for us, it's a mix of things, right? You have some like our top level OKRs, like stuff we're aiming for as a company, our North Star metrics, stuff like that. But then also being able to balance in like the request from our biggest or like target customers, right? And not everyone who uses your product might be in your target audience. You're not going to say that to them, but yeah, I mean, when you look at all your feedback, it's like not everyone's created equal, not everyone should be treated the same. And so being able to understand where feedback is coming from, super important. But then we also look at, what features, offer like significant revenue potential, right? Like, is there a large opportunity revenue potential in some of these features? We weigh that in as well. And then, for us, it's also, what are we excited about as a team, right? Like, the work should be fun, ideally, right? So, we try to pull in, what are we excited about? Is there new technology that we're excited about? Is there like, are certain engineers excited about, working more on the back end versus the front, whatever it is. I think that's something to balance in as well, just because, we're not going to do good work if we're not enjoying it, right? And so that's something that we also balance in, and hopefully, a lot of these overlap. But yeah, it's definitely a mix of things. And for us, we also weigh those things against each other too. So like our OKRs are probably, weighted more heavily than some other things in the mix. But yeah, it's a mix.
Makes sense. Simone, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would say definitely a combination of what Chris and Sarah just said, like as an example, what Chris was saying in terms of how many products do you have. We are a gateway, so we have a platform that probably we have tens of products, and we try to distribute it as a software as a service and with a white label focus. So at the beginning of my journey here, it was a mess, the prioritization, because there's also a risk to go too much in bespoke solutions, trying to help too much or support too much those big customers that Sarah was mentioning, but that sometimes like they just throw to you things that just because they're seeing, try to copy paste strategies from someone else, but then really what's the appetite and what's the demand in the market. So another thing, we try to stack rank everything across the board for all the teams, and then we adopt SAFe and trying to have the teams picking up like the things from the board based on the ranking. But in the end, it doesn't work as well, because with all those products, then there's a risk that everything goes in security and compliance. We work in regulated markets, and if you take that approach, then that's going to take away your entire capacity. So going back, we said this doesn't work. Let's look at outcomes that we want to achieve based on our strategy, and then we divided the teams around in domains, trying to distribute capacity and the resources across those domains so that they can set up their prioritization, looking at what do we need to do to keep our existing product capabilities above them, so giving that kind of flexibility to them, so keeping them happy, but then also being able to look and talk to the customers and the regions and defining like an intake process, what do we need to do, business cases, opportunities, and then based on this, having the possibility to bring new initiatives inside the queue. So a combination, definitely, but be careful not to get into the rabbit hole of too much bespoke customization.
Yeah, can I add to that actually? Yeah, I think like a big part of, being able to listen to your customers is also being able to say no to them, right? Like if you get requests from, a very high paying customer, like it's very motivating. But at the same time, if it's not going to, deliver anything for the rest of your customer base, are you just a consultant at this point? Like that's not what we're here to do. So yeah, also being aware of that. That's a good point.
That's super important, sir. Like for the rest of the customer base, like if you do something that only works for the customer and then the customer doesn't deliver, you find yourself with something that is going to create like, issues in terms of maintenance, security, and no revenues. And so,
Exactly.
Yeah, the subtle art of knowing how to say no, right? It's we've got a fun video series on that if anyone's interested. Check out our YouTube. Interesting topic. Cool. We've had quite a few people come in during the first question. I just want to remind everyone, if you have any questions for the panel, just drop them in the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end. But with that, moving on to the next question. I'd like to talk a little bit about feedback management, something that's really important to us at Canny, obviously, but to the panel, how do you manage user feedback and how does that impact your prioritization? And I think we'll start with Sarah if we can.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, obviously we use Canny, like it's meant to help, centralize our feedback so we have a good view of, what everyone is saying across the board. The really nice thing about working in B2B is that, they tell you what's not working because they're paying you to solve a problem for them. And so if things aren't working, if you're not solving that problem, they're going to let you know. Hopefully by telling you and not churning, but that's also a huge signal, right? And so for us, it's really important to keep a pulse on what people are saying, to people on the front line. So people like sales, success, support, people doing research, stuff like that. How are we losing deals? Why are we losing deals? What are people asking for when it comes to renewal, stuff like that? Like all of this is important information. But I also want to say it's part of our job to really dig in and understand the problem at hand. Like going back to the last question, like you really need to dig in and really understand the use case. Like they might come to you with a solution that's not necessarily what you should build, right? And so it's really important to understand the problem at hand and how painful it is, what are the use cases before you actually dive in and solution it, because you could end up building the wrong thing, just going by what the customer is asking for, and then whoops, it doesn't fit with your system, or it doesn't fit the long-term vision, whatever it is. And then when it comes to using that feedback in prioritization, I think for us, like going back to what I was saying earlier too, identity is super, super important. You need to know where it's coming from. Like I'm not a fan of, these open-ended forms that are just like, oh, give us your feedback. Like I need to know who you are. I need to know how long you've been with us, how much you're paying, like what customer segment you're in. Are you even a key customer that we care about? For us, we have a huge cohort of free users. I appreciate you, but at the same time, you're not paying us any money. So it's like, I want to definitely focus on the problems that we're solving for our paid customers. So really quantifying the feedback there, and then really segmenting the feedback to, our key audience. And then from there, working with engineering to understand effort, because that needs to be balanced in. We ideally want to work on some quick wins and some high impact things. So yeah, a little bit of a mix too.
Mixes are common. Belinda, we'll get you into the conversation here. How do you manage feedback and use it to prioritize?
Yeah, I think it's about signals and collecting all the right signals, including the signals that you get from the actual usage of your product. I mean, being able to get that metric from the product itself, and then mixing that in with the interaction that you have with your community, and balancing and finding the commonality between that to help with your prioritization. So similar to what Sarah's saying, make sure you're metering those interactions in your product that is the things that are value. Mix that in with the conversation and feedback that you're getting through with Salesforce's idea exchange, or your Canny tool, and also just having those live conversations with the customers in the customer community focused sessions, or the interactive communities. And then it's finding the commonality with that feedback. And like Sarah says, like making sure what's the identity, what's their motivation, what was their intention, kind of dig into that to be able to say, okay, these things will fit into my prioritization based on how many people they'll benefit.
That makes complete sense. Simone, would you like to chime in on feedback and prioritization?
Oh yeah, I would love to, and especially as Sarah said, how can you make sure that what the customer asks in reality is what all the other customers want and what you really need. We had perfect examples where some of our customers were all the regions, because we as Mastercard have regional representatives that talk to our customers. We're asking for a set of functionalities on a specific capability. Then we made some research, usability research and validation with its customers similar to our customers, and we will talk about that why in a bit. And it completely changed the prioritization. And out of 5 of those initiatives, only 4 we kept, and we had to prioritize something else. So that's super important. Now, why we're saying let's talk about the customers of our customers that are similar. A challenge for us is we work in regulated markets and white label customers, so B2B to B2C. So how do we talk to the third B? And sometimes it's difficult to get access to those. We need to go to the first B, and sometimes they don't give immediately access to their merchants, their business, small businesses, or they have some resistance because of how the market is. So of course, you do workshops with them, validation, and we try to get their feedback. But then you need to also find creative ways to find customers that are similar to their customers in that region, trying to find a way to make surveys, usability researches of what you can do, and then validate the type of products and experiences that you want to use. So I think it's an important topic, also the one of the white labeling, when you have so many actors in between that prevent you from reaching in an easy way your final customer, let's say.
Yeah, that's certainly an interesting challenge to add on to the function. Cool. So we talked about feedback. Definitely it can help you assess demand for specific features or indicate a common pain point. But prioritization also has to look at the effort required to address that feedback or solve that pain point. So I'd like to hear how the panel assigns cost to different features and how you look at that side of the equation. Chris, would you like to start us off on this topic?
Sure, and I think you're probably starting with someone that's more of a curmudgeon, or I think what I always worry about is whenever we're doing something like impact versus effort type of kind of prioritization, we end up looking at effort as something that is equal to prioritization, when the reality is that we should be prioritizing things first, right? We should be aligning it with our strategy. We should be deciding what is actually most important to do. And then we should consider things like how costly, or what is the perceived effort, or even what is the sequencing by which we should be doing something. Because that importance, if we go with effort ahead of time, there's plenty of times that are in this like quadrant that is high effort but high impact, where people call it pie in the sky, usually is what that area is called. But I would argue that if you just went off of that, you would probably not go after the things that are really most important for your actual organization. And so what you should be doing is you should be saying that for all those things that are in that quadrant, if you decide to do things that way, is like, how can we break this down? How can we look at the assumptions that are going into this? How can we experiment or prototype or do user research that helps bring these things into the realm of like feasibility? But in reality, what I usually do is I'll say that, okay, well, we're going to do prioritization right now based on what's most important. We'll do that first. We'll get to kind of something like a stack ranking ideally. But even if it's not stack ranking, at least there's kind of some bucketing of like, here's the most important to least important things. And then we can start to talk about like, out of all this stuff, we need to start thinking about it. That's why I kind of Capex 3X model, which talks a lot about like explore, expand, exploit, is that if there are things that are in the explore phase, we should be saying like, what is the bare minimum kind of fast, cheap type of experimentation we can do with this, because we haven't proven anything yet. But once we start like seeing that there's takeoff, that people are using it, and that like we're keep on hitting bottlenecks, that's a very different resourcing type of conversation. And so I think that like discernment between what phase you're in is really, really important when you start to decide what is the cost that you're willing to give. Because I think the biggest mistake any team will make is like investing the entire team into something that is not a sure thing, that you don't know for sure. And this is why I also think like prioritizing problems is maybe more important than even solutions, especially at that stage. Because if you give me kind of the idea of like, you need to just do this one solution, like I think it was Spotify that had said that out of all their A/B testing, I'm just using this as like a heuristic, but they said like a third of the time it would actually have a positive impact, a third of the time it had no impact, and a third of the time it had a negative impact, right? And so if we assume that's kind of the chances that we have with most projects, if you just say that this one solution is the thing we have to go after, I have like 1/3 of a chance of being correct. But if you tell me that I should go after this problem, and I can do a bunch of really cheap experiments to get into that space of like, we can start to then spread across all those things, and then we can see what things work, and we can start to look at patterns that will help us decide better. So I think that's how I approach cost and kind of effort and sequencing, is that it's something that happens after prioritization.
Absolutely. We like to say that our tool costs less than building the wrong features. And that really comes into understanding what the problems are and prioritizing those problems, so you know that you're in putting your investment.
That's the most important thing that I usually do, is like help us shut down projects or products before we actually build them, right? It's kind of like in the machine learning world, like actually the best model to run is one that you don't run at all, because it's most efficient. And so I would always say like being effective at something is way more valuable than just being efficient at the wrong thing, right?
Totally. Yeah, great points. Simone, do you want to discuss how you approach this?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love Chris. How you used also the method, the examples of how looking at the objectives and defining like first what's important, and then looking into the solution and getting the cost. Like as an example, I was saying before, we created like an intake process for any new thing that is coming out that is not linked to existing capabilities or maintenance or that kind of work. The first thing we do is like a triage and saying like, is this aligned to where we want to head to, or like, are we going to change our priorities, like our outcomes and imperatives because of this? Does it make sense? Yes. Then at that point we give like, okay, let's go on and let's, dear domain, dear team, let's work on defining how to do it, how to get there, what's the solution. And then maybe the solution is building, not building, partnering. It depends on how many things you can leverage commodities that are there on the market, how much you can create like a unique value on your side. And then I would say some other things that are super important. Then from our perspective, regulation, again, going and look, there's where also the capital intensive costs are really important, like hardware deployment. Do you need to deploy something on soil because you have to support a specific regulation? That becomes super important. Another super important thing in terms of cost is the maintenance, the run, keeping the security, the compliance of those functionalities, because we did a lot of mistakes in the past when we had business cases and funding just for the build and probably the first year. And then now I need to review like all the capabilities and services, like which are the ones that in reality are generating a loss-making machines, because just to keep them alive, I'm killing all the revenues that they generate, or they're creating more problems than there. So having that kind of lens, looking what's beyond just the build, the initial phase, that's super important to analyze everything from the cost perspective and also the prioritization. And as I said, like you define initially what's important, let them go, define what are the solutions, come back, and then maybe out of this, the recommendation is like, no, it doesn't make sense. We're not going to do it anymore. Like there's no way to do it in a creative way that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So yeah, we'll move on in the conversation here. Pivoting a bit to resource optimization. So this is kind of the title of the webinar. It's in there. Question is, how are you optimizing resources this year? And Sarah, we'll start with you if that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a hard one. I feel like you can tackle this in a few different ways, I guess. So I think first off, just it might sound a little bit basic, but like really just honing in on like a focused area versus like, everyone kind of targeting different goals and stuff like that. Just getting everyone to the same page, right? And in agreement, first of all. So that we can all, be aiming at the same goal. And, when we're checking in, we check in on the progress towards those, and we're all kind of focused on the same area. From there, I think it's just prioritizing the right things. I think engineering resources are like some of the most expensive. Engineering resources, engineering time, everything. So it's important to actually take that time, first of all, to plan your roadmap. We do this right now on a quarterly basis, which we feel like is a good cadence. It gives engineering time to knock out significant projects, but then we also have like little check-ins in between to check in on progress. And then something I'm thinking about more now is, I've talked about this a lot, but haven't really put into practice, and it's just like working smarter, not harder. Leveraging tools and processes that help like streamline and just be more efficient with the time that we have. And there's a lot of talk around AI and ChatGPT and all of that stuff. Like, how can we leverage that to help us do more with less? And so we're thinking about that a bit, which is interesting, kind of interesting area to look at. And I feel like it's pretty new, but at the same time, it's something that we should have always been looking at. How do we just be more efficient with our time? And then I think for us, our team is fully remote. So it's also something around, figuring out how to be more efficient working asynchronously. Like we try to have very, very few meetings, sending more videos as opposed to like, let's hop on a call, especially with a team that's spread across the world. So something that we're thinking about, but also to Chris's point earlier, I think, ship MVPs, like cheap experiments. I think just being really intentional about the scope of a project, and not blowing that up, no scope creep, stuff like that. Like you can always expand and add to things down the line. If people find the MVP or minimum viable product or minimum viable feature valuable, right? And I feel like shutting down features is really hard and really painful, especially for the people who built it. And so we're trying to avoid doing that. And so being really informed, data, feedback, all of that good stuff, just helps us be very intentional about what we work on. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's great. And I think really highlights just there's a lot of different angles you can come at resource optimization from, a lot of different ways of tackling it, different tools you can use. So yeah, I think it's a super interesting topic. Cool. Well, with that, we'll move on to our next question.
I think Simone maybe was.
Oh, did you want to chime in, Simone? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was thinking like, because definitely I can relate on being remote, and we are globally spread as well as a team, so a lot of different time zones, and also linking to what we said before. First thing, saying no, and at some point, like you have the positive imperatives, the positive objectives, but like also what are the negative imperatives? Like what are the things that, hey, no way we're going to do this anymore this year or the next 2 years, so forget about it. That's super important. It helped us a lot. We had to stop a lot of projects, and that is helping us. tools, offline tools. I love that, and it's helping a lot the collaboration. The more and more we adopt them. And another thing, I'm trying to push more. Like, I personally hate like all the committees, all the meetings, all the bureaucracy, like, and all the presentations that we need to do, and the like Excel spreadsheets or slides with roadmaps. Forget about that. I'm trying to push as much as possible these tools. Hey, you have full transparency, region, customers, or whatever. Go there, you can access my roadmap, you can access the things, have a look at them offline, and then when we go in the meetings, let's discuss about the things and let's take actions, or like make decisions, but let's not spend time like to create like the 300 version of a presentation with a roadmap.
Yes. Yes, 100%. I also want to add, like, I feel like if you put out a question, like I do this all the time, like I want to get feedback from the team, but I also don't want it to be a conversation that goes for weeks and weeks. So it's at some point you kind of just have, like, somebody makes the call, and if you disagree, kind of disagree and commit, whatever Jeff Bezos quote is. But like, you know, make the decision and move on, versus like, let's linger on this and have forever, like, chat about it forever. So that's something else too, is just, you know, somebody taking point and taking responsibility and saying, okay, we're going to try this because of XYZ, and we're going to, you know, as Simone said, you know, weigh it against, you know, those negative factors as well, and see what works. At some point you just got to execute.
Totally. I'm really glad you chimed in, Simone, because it transitions well to the next question. So when you're prioritizing, you can't please everyone. Some stakeholders are not going to have what they want built on the roadmap. So when you're making these decisions, how do you communicate what the product team's priorities are to other teams and kind of managing those expectations? Belinda, would you like to jump in on that one?
Absolutely. I think the first part is making sure that your company process is aligned on the release schedule. And then after that is communicate early and often, as soon as the priorities change, or if it's not on there to start with, be strong about the no, I stopped working on it, or this is just not something that we can prioritize for this year with the resource constraints that we have. But keep the conversation and make sure those people are communicating, because you also want to avoid them going around you, because I've had that situation. Talk about stories, like you say no, and then they go and build something that you're going to have to come back and pick up later. So even though you've said no, keep the conversation open.
Yeah, that's a great piece of advice. Chris, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I'd also include that we should be making the models by which we make these decisions more clear to people, because a lot of the time, you know, I think a big mistake a lot of teams make is they'll hold like some huge queue of like potential features that are in the backlog or the icebox. And I used to just, like, whenever someone would talk about iceboxes in one team, I would take a post-it note, write icebox on it, and then attach it to the trash can that we had in our meeting room, because that's honestly what it was, right? And I think not being upfront about this type of thing, allowing those types of queues to be created, especially like wish list queues, but then not communicating like what is the model we're actually using to prioritize things today, ends up meaning that people start to perceive it as like you're a gatekeeper, and that it's just whether it's up to you or not, when the reality is like it should be up to the entire team kind of coming together and aligning on these prioritization models. And so I think that's why backing into this idea of like either tenants, this over that statements, even things like a strategy document that has clear kind of delineation of where we're going to focus or not focus. I think that's something you need to have, because once people start to understand that, they actually want to still potentially work within whatever those kind of like, I guess, models are in some way. But if they can't do that, they're going to keep bringing things that are going to just be potentially like what sales wants to do or what a customer is asked to do. And so I think being more clear about that communication can help avoid a lot of these types of problems, and actually will make people even be more imaginative or creative when it comes to fitting into these types of models in some way. So I think that like communication is really, really important.
That makes complete sense. And if you involve people, they know how to better give ideas, give feedback, and actually contribute to the process, right? Or feel more included. So yeah, that's all great feedback. What's also great is that we're right on time for our agenda, and now we have just over 10 minutes for audience questions. So we actually got some good ones. I'm kind of excited to present to the panel here. So the first one is, how do you deal with the highest paid person opinion, HIPPO challenge, when dealing with feature requests? And whoever wants to chime in on this is welcome to.
Yeah, it's to be honest, it's not easy. It's not always easy, and there are several. In my experience, I had like several types of dynamics that came out of this. Now, to be honest, if it happens again and again, then probably personally is not the right environment for me to continue to work on, because I want to work in a company that is based on facts, based on the right proper roadmap. And as an example, like as I was mentioning before, like all those commitments and bespoke things that we're doing for customers, just saying yes to the one that was screaming the most and then having an escalation, like that was not the way to go forward from my perspective. So you need to, of course, try to bring in a journey, product strategy, explaining things, as Chris was mentioning, communication, transparency, showing why this is bringing you the money, the revenues, or whatever you need to achieve the goals. And to be honest, like if at some point it doesn't work and it goes back to the old habits, I would personally change.
Well, one other thing I'd love to add about that is that, I think one of the things that's really valuable, especially working with very senior leaders, is that they sometimes have kind of additional context that you may not have access to. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that they're just at a whim asking you for something all the time. I mean, they are sometimes. And I'll talk about that in a second. But I do think trying to contextualize why this is a problem, or what is the team or the evidence that's like coming up. And so I think the way you can handle those types of things, because there's usually like power dynamics at play in these types of situations too, where, trying to understand what the thing is, asking follow-up questions, asking people that we should be talking to about this thing. I think you always want to try to limit the number of these things that you take on, but I think at least at that point, if you can contextualize it in some way to your work, you're more easily able to kind of say, how does this fit into the framework, rather than it just being like a thing that distracts the team. And then I would also kind of say that Derek Sivers has this really great post about 2 cents, where whenever a senior leader kind of gives their just like 2 cents in a meeting, a lot of people then just like jump and try to now like deal with it in some way. When the reality is it could have just been a throwaway comment. And so I think the other thing about this too is that once you contextualize these things, I think what you'll find is that some of the time, if you're like, hey, we looked at this feature, it doesn't seem ideal for our main like persona or job to be done. It doesn't seem to meet our prioritization criteria, but I want to let you know that like I've looked into this and we're following up. It's not something we're going to take on right now. I think people, like some of the time when it is that kind of 2 cent throwaway comment, we end up spending up so much work for things that may not actually be that valuable for people. So I think those are some other things to kind of think about when we talk about this. But I mean, that out of the 4 things that I do whenever I'm working somewhere, it's either do the best job you can. It's check the box and make sure you make it easy for other people to check the box. The third thing is to actively subvert and build shadow systems. And then the fourth one is always walk away. So I think those are 4 good options to think about when dealing with this.
I would add also that, like you said, it could be like Chris said, it could be a throwaway. To get confirmation from an ally in the room on what was said, and just, did you hear the same thing that the other person heard? And then go in and dig in on the why and the intentionality behind that, behind the comments. So,
yeah, always important to get to why. I see that even just observing our engineers, product managers, salespeople, and I think we have a culture of like, this is the customer request, but how do we really get to what they're trying to accomplish? What's their pain? And I think that helps you marry it more with the product vision and what the priority is. So very cool. Our next question is, what are the regular scheduled meetings and related processes you have to prioritize, understand timing, and assign resourcing?
Yeah, I can jump in. Yeah, as I said earlier, we do just our, quarterly road mapping. So we do it on a quarterly basis, coming to Q2 right now. So we're going to talk about, what's up on the Q2 roadmap soon here. But then in between that, I think for us, in terms of the nitty gritty, like the resourcing and the timing, we have weekly kind of product stand-ups or syncs where we just kind of get a status update on certain projects. And that just helps, product management have a good idea of what our timeline's like, what's coming up, who's doing what at what time. Yeah, I think it's as simple as that. I think, I mean, with us, it's a pretty small team, and so we're able to kind of just balance things. And once we have our roadmap set for the quarter, it's just like, work down that list, not necessarily in order. If they're for an engineer, if there's something that they're more excited about, they might jump kind of around the prioritization list. But at the end of the quarter, ideally, more than 2/3 of the roadmap that we set out are complete, and then we're pretty happy.
Cool. Does anyone else want to jump in on this question? Or should we move on to the next one?
Quite similar. I mean, like, of course, as I mentioned, we also adopted SAFE, that I'm not a super fan, but let's say we use it, and especially it's useful when you have like different acquisitions. You need to bring everyone to a certain type of standard. But in terms of how we're trying to balance it is like the quarterly planning. It becomes like a commitments in terms of objectives, outcomes that we want to achieve, and then we leave the domains to work on how they prioritize into the backlog on a weekly basis, bi-weekly basis in each iteration, and they continue to have their sessions. As I mentioned before, we have like intake meetings so that go at a monthly frequency if needed, when we evaluate new things that are currently not part of the outcomes or the objectives or the list that we already agreed upon, to make sure also that we can accordingly reallocate resources if needed. And then, of course, like every 6 months at least, there's a complete review of the imperatives, where are we, how are we progressing, and how we want to change them. And of course, everything impacts to everyone.
Sounds great. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Belinda.
Yeah, I was going to say, so Salesforce, the teams that I work with, we work on an agile, like a sprint, like 2-week sprints and such. So usually the cadence of the meetings is a release level where there's deeper discussions about what needs to be, what the problems to be solved, and what epics to be scheduled for the release. And then the details happen with the every 2 weeks sprint planning. And that's when you actually put it on the wall, and you have the deep discussion. So I don't know if that was the target of the question. It really depends on, are you working with the sprint cycles that way, in which case your cadence is going to follow your sprints, or if you're working more of a project level where your cycles are going to be more associated with the project cycles. So.
Got it. Makes sense. We're getting close for time, but I think we have time for quick answers to one more audience question. And that question is, how do you handle feedback from internal users versus external customers, especially when internal customers can have a tendency to be louder?
From a platform perspective, we have to deal a lot with the balancing the demands of the internal versus the external. And usually what we always end up going is this going to benefit the external customer, what you're asking for? Is there actually a path for the efficiency and the changes you're asking for the internal work that will translate to an external impact? And so it is partly digging at the why and not just accepting the solution that's being offered, because yes, your internal customers are they tend to know the system a whole lot more. So they come with a solution where you have to challenge that. But it comes down to, is this going to have an outcome that will benefit our external customers as well?
Yeah, just to add to that, to Belinda's point here, I feel like, I don't think we have as much of a problem here with, loud internal users. I think potentially where that comes from is like through the sales side, where, they want to close deals. They want to earn their commission. They want their features to be built. But for me, it's like, okay, show me the accounts, show me who's asking for these features. Like at the end of the day, it comes back to the customer. And so if they're being really loud, I kind of would say kind of dig into the why and, where that's coming from. I think a lot of the times it could be, a different motivation. And so, yeah, especially from the sales side or even renewal, stuff like that, wherever it's attached to potential revenue. Yeah, where's it coming from? Show me the data, show me the evidence that you have to support, you pushing this feature or this feature set.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Getting to why. It's a very common mantra for anyone in product. But with that, yeah, I think we're pretty much right at time here. Schedule wise, that worked out well. Thank you to our panelists for joining us today. Thank you for everyone who joined us. We will be sending around the recording. Feel free to share that with anyone that you think would find this valuable. And yeah, just thank you again to all involved, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you all for chatting.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you.